My daughter locked me out of my own house, saying, "This place is ours now. You're just a guest." Her husband smiled as he changed the locks in front of me, but when I showed them who really owned the deed, their jaws dropped on the spot. Her smile vanished before I tell you what I saw on my own porch. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to know the city, the street, the country, because when I say the word home, your mind will picture your own doorway, your own key, your own quiet space that smells like your life. Now hold that picture. Hold it while I tell you how I walked up my driveway carrying a bag of apples, the kind my late wife used to like, and found a man I knew, my son-in-law, leaning into my lock with a silver tool, the door half open like a mouth caught mid-sentence. The bag slipped in my hand, the apples knocked each other softly, a hollow sound, like fruit in a wooden bowl. He did not turn at first. He was too busy forcing the cylinder to listen to him. My daughter stood with her arms folded, one hip tilted, her eyes harder than the day she was born. The porch light was on, though it was still late afternoon, and it threw a pale circle on the welcome mat my wife picked out, the one with the faded leaves. I watched his wrist twist, heard the small scrape from the new deadbolt, new shine catching the sun. I took one step up the porch. "What are you doing?" My voice stayed low. It surprised me how steady it sounded. My daughter looked at me like she was looking through a window at a stranger. "This place is ours now, Dad," she said, clear as a bell, like she had practiced the line. "You're just a guest." There was a time I would have laughed and asked if this was some silly prank, but the way her husband glanced over his shoulder and smiled, thin, sideways, a little flash of teeth, told me he wanted me to feel it. He wanted the cut to be clean and seen. He tightened one screw and then another, metal turning, that neat click at the finish. He held up a set of keys, 3 on a small ring, crisp edges, untouched by pockets or time. He dangled them, and the light passed through the hole like a tiny moon. I noticed the small things because the big thing was too big. He didn't say a word yet. He didn't have to. The house behind him said enough. The smell of cedar polish, the picture frames on the wall, the stairs that creaked on the 3rd step. All of it just beyond the line of the door. "I was gone an hour," I said. "I went for apples." My voice sounded like a calm road, straight and plain. I didn't step over the threshold. I stood with the weight of the bag digging into my fingers. My daughter shifted, the way you shift when you're bracing for a wave. "You don't have to bring groceries anymore," she said. "We've got it handled. Things are changing." The words were stiff in her mouth, like a shirt that didn't fit. I watched her husband watch me. He enjoyed the ooh stuff I watching. He was already a man who had moved a hook by the door to fit his jacket, who made space and then acted like the space had always been his. The air was cooler than it should have been. The afternoon pulled back a little, like a curtain drawn an inch. I took one breath that reached all the way into the old rooms of my chest. I didn't argue. I did not plead. I learned a long time ago that not all storms deserve a shout. Sometimes you stand and listen and let the wind show you its direction. "Is that what you want to say to me?" I asked her, very even, my eyes on hers, not on the keys, not on the bolt, not on him. A muscle moved in her jaw. She looked away first. She looked at the hallway where our family photos used to hang in a neat line, my wife's soft touch arranging them by date and height, the way she loved order. I saw an empty space on the wall. Something had been moved. My mind stored that away like a coin slipped into a pocket. "You should know what this house is to me. Let me carry you back for a moment, only a moment, so you understand the shape of what they were trying to cut. The day we bought it, the plaster smelled dusty and the floors were dull, but the windows were generous, and the yard caught a slice of lake breeze if you stood on the back steps at dusk. My wife stood in the front room with the sun on her face and said, "This is a house that wants a family." She took my hand and placed it on her stomach. She was 5 months along. We had laughed because the room echoed and made our happiness sound important. I painted the nursery myself, yellow, not too bright. We planted a maple in the backyard that same spring. I can still feel the heft of the shovel and the way the roots looked like a sleeping hand. The first week we moved in, our daughter learned to walk on these floors. She tottered from my knees to her mother's open arms, lips damp with applesauce, hair smelling like shampoo that came in a bottle with a duck on it. I still see the spot by the couch where she fell and didn't cry because we clapped before the tears could form. The kitchen window caught morning light so well that even oatmeal looked like a feast. Home, my wife would say, as if the word itself could clean a mess, calm a baby, fix a day. Home. It worked more often than you'd expect. On Sundays, we would sit on the porch and watch our daughter draw on the step with chalk. She would press blue dust into the lines of her fingers and hold her hands up to show us, proud of the new color of her skin. Years rolled and left their marks gently. Birthday candles, pencil lines on the hallway wall to measure how tall she was getting. A shoe rack that always had one shoe too many or one too few. My wife filled the house with small rituals. A bowl of clementines on the table in winter, a vase of lilacs on the piano in spring, cool sheets in summer, cinnamon in fall. Even when money was thin, the house felt fat with care. When I came home late, from jobs I took just to keep us steady, loading trucks, fixing roofs, counting inventory in a warehouse that smelled like cardboard, I would tiptoe through the front room and see my two girls asleep on the couch. A cartoon paused on the TV, the light soft as breath. I would tell myself, quietly, that I had everything that mattered. And I did. The day we paid off the mortgage, my wife baked bread. Bread for a free house, she said, waving the wooden spoon like a wand. We danced in the kitchen, my daughter spinning between us, hair flying, socks sliding on the floor. I kept the final notice in a drawer with the important papers. It was a thin sheet, but heavy with the years that sat on it. We ate that bread warm with butter and honey and laughed at nothing, because sometimes joy needs no reason. That night, when the house settled and the maple in the yard brushed the window with its leaves, I thought, this place will outlast us. It felt like a promise we all made to each other without speaking. Life, as it does, turned. My wife's breath grew shorter one winter that came too early and stayed too long. Hospitals smell the same wherever you go. Antiseptic and quiet fear. She fought the way gentle people fight, stubbornly, with grace. When she went, the house felt too big, then too small, then like the only size that fit. I walked the rooms at night to hear the echo of her steps. I kept her shawl on the back of the chair she loved. I learned how to make the soup she used to make and failed, then tried again until I got close. Our daughter cried in the kitchen and I held her. We sat on the floor with our backs against the cabinets, passing tissues, the tile cold through our jeans. We keep going, I said. Not because I was strong, because there was no other direction. After she married, I tried to welcome the man my daughter chose. He shook my hand like he was checking the weight of a tool. He called me sir in a way that sounded like a joke I wasn't in on. He asked questions about the house the way a buyer does at an open house, casual, eyes measuring. I told myself I was being unfair. Love means you choose to see the best and wait for it to arrive. At first, they came by on Sundays, and my daughter would sit on the porch rail, laughing, her laughter a bridge over whatever I didn't trust in him. He would point out things that needed fixing, like he was auditioning for the role of man of the house. That hinge squeaks, he'd say. That faucet drips. Small things. I fixed them. Quietly. I still remember the first time he asked about the deed. We were washing dishes. He said it like he was talking about the weather. So, the house is in your name alone? I nodded. It's been that way since the start, I said. He smiled then, a short smile that didn't reach anything. Makes sense, he said. For now. I looked at him. For now. The words sat between us like a small, sharp object. My daughter dried a plate and didn't look up. I filed it away. So many things to file away before a day like today makes all the files useful. You might think the moment on the porch would boil my blood. It didn't. It cooled me. It cooled me the way a lake cools your ankles when you step in too far on a hot day. The bag of apples felt heavy, then light, then like nothing at all. I set it gently on the step. One apple rolled and stopped against the welcome mat leaf that always curls up. My daughter's eyes flicked to it and away. I could see her heart beating at her neck, a small pulse like a bird beneath a hand. She was acting brave. She was following a script written in a voice that wasn't hers. I knew my child's real voice. I knew it from scraped knees and bad dreams and piano recitals that went wrong and right. Listen, I said, and the word came out calm, almost soft. The kind of soft that makes people lean in. Before you close that door, think about what you're saying. I was not begging. I was offering a last exit from a road they would regret. My son-in-law clicked the last screw, wiped his hands on a clean rag, and finally spoke. We don't need a lecture, he said. It's simple. Boundaries, new rules. He said rules like he liked the taste of it. He stepped back from the door to admire his work the way a boy admires a tower of blocks, proud and eager to knock it down if he has to. I watched his reflection in the glass. He admired himself too. Do not think I was powerless, standing there on my own porch like a salesman. Power wears many clothes. Sometimes it is paper, sometimes it is silence, sometimes it is a steady hand not reaching for a shoulder to shake. What I felt then was not anger. It was something colder and clearer, like the air that comes in right before a storm that finally breaks the heat. I looked past them into the hallway. On the narrow table, the one with the nick on the corner from the day we tried to move it without lifting high enough, I saw a picture frame face down. It used to hold my wife's photo. My wife's smile lived there. Someone had turned it so her eyes looked into wood. I felt something tighten and then stop. A small click, like a lock, not the one in the door, closing inside me. I could tell you I raised my voice. I didn't. I could tell you I pounded on the door when he swung it wider like a man guarding a gate. I didn't. I let my silence do the pounding. I let my eyes do the talking. You're making a mistake, I said, and it came out flat, like a road that goes on for miles. My daughter shifted again, the way a person shifts when the shoes they were wearing belong to someone else. For a second, her mouth softened. For a second, I saw the little girl who ran barefoot on this very porch and asked for one more story before bed. Then the second ended. She lifted her chin. It's decided, she said. Don't make this harder. I nodded once. The maple tree in the yard moved its leaves. I heard the lake, faint and far. I reached down and took the rolling apple and set it back in the bag with the others. My hand did not shake. I straightened and met their eyes, one after the other. All right, I said, if that's how you want to begin. I said begin because even in that moment I knew this was not the end of anything. It was the start of a story I had never wished to tell, but that I would tell carefully, step by steady step, until every truth stood where it belonged. And I stood there, on my own porch, the smell of apple skin in the air, and I let the quiet fill the space they had not noticed they were leaving open. I stayed on the porch with the bag of apples by my feet, and I could feel the line they were drawing, not with chalk, not with rope, but with the way they stood, close together, shoulders angled, the door behind them, like a wall they could move at will. I'll step in and put these on the counter, I said, the way I have said it for years, like it's the simplest thing in the world. My daughter didn't step aside. She lifted her chin, and that tiny move told me everything. No, she said, and the word was sharper than I've ever heard from her. You can leave them. We'll handle it. The apples were heavy, but not as heavy as that number. Her husband leaned his shoulder against the doorframe, the way a man leans on something he believes belongs to him, and he smiled again, only this time the smile had a message. It said, "Watch me." Boundaries, he said, as if he were teaching a class. We talked about this. New rules for the house, healthy distance. He liked the sound of those words in his mouth. I could tell he'd practiced them, maybe in a mirror, maybe in the car before they pulled up. I didn't know I needed rules to come home, I replied, level. The wind carried a thin smell of lake water and cut grass. A bird called once and stopped, as if even it didn't want to interrupt. He lifted the ring of keys and let them jingle, a light metal laugh. Houses need order, sir, he said, and he put that sir on like a hat he thought made him taller. We're taking care of things now. I looked past them again, because it's what my eyes wanted to do, wanted to confirm what my heart already knew. The picture of my wife was still face down on the narrow table, the edge of the frame catching a little light. The rug was rolled a few inches, like it had been moved and then kicked back lazy. One of my wife's painted bowls, a shallow blue one she used for lemons, had been pushed to the far end of the console, almost out of sight, as if pretty things made by old hands were clutter to be cleared. Small signs. A house speaks loudest in its small signs. "Let me in," I said softly to my daughter, just like that, 3 words that used to open any door between us. She held my eyes longer this time, long enough for me to see the flash of fear under the hardness. Then, she looked at him, not at me, and she said, "No, not today." His confidence grew in the space her eyes left for it. He pushed the door wider, but not for me, only to show me how easily it moved for him. You can pick up a few things, he said, and he nodded toward the porch swing as if he were giving directions to a visitor. We packed some clothes for you, in the garage. The word garage hit like a wet cloth. I saw the outline of a cardboard box through the glass of the side door, my jacket folded on top, like a flag lowered quietly. You packed my clothes, I repeated, not a question, just placing the words where they belong between us. We're being efficient, he said. It's better for everyone this way. He made better sound like a matter settled long ago. I felt anger knock once, twice, and then it left. In its place came something cleaner. I have learned the sound of my own patience, the way it slides into my body when the world starts to grind its gears. What is this really about? I asked, and I wasn't asking him. I was asking her. She shifted again, and the porch boards made that familiar sound under her weight, the one my wife used to step around when coffee was in her hand. My daughter took a breath and said, "We talked to someone. We know our options now." The words were stiff, secondhand. Talk to someone. Options. I looked at her husband and he met my eyes like a man standing on a raft he thinks is dock. "We've taken advice," he said. "You've had your time here. You can still come by, with notice. But the day-to-day, that's us." "Advice," I repeated, letting it sit in the air a moment. "From who?" He rolled his wrist, the keys cutting a neat arc. "Doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is the future. We're modernizing things. New locks, new codes, utilities in our names, cleaner finances. We found some loopholes, ways to streamline. It's complicated. It wouldn't make sense to you." He wanted me to feel old, out of step, left behind by forms and screens and terms he thought he mastered. He said loopholes like boys say secret password. My daughter stared at a spot just above my shoulder, past me, into something she didn't want to see. "It's better if you don't make a scene," she said, but her voice wobbled at the end, just a hair, small enough most people wouldn't hear it. I did. I hear everything in this house. I bent and picked up the apple bag again, more to give my hands something to do than for the weight of it. An apple had split a little where it had bumped another. The split glistened. I thought of my wife cutting fruit at this doorway for our daughter when she was little, handing slices through, laughing when juice ran down her wrist. I thought of the exact sound a knife makes on the cutting board in our kitchen, the not quite hollow, not quite solid tap. Memory is a room with the lights on when the rest of the house is gone. Dark. I stood in it for a heartbeat, then set the bag down once more and looked at the two of them as if I were a man considering a purchase and not finding the quality promised. "You've changed the locks," I said. "You've changed the codes. You've packed my clothes. You've turned a picture face down. That's one way to send a message." He nodded, relieved to be understood on his terms. "Exactly," he said. "So we're done here. You don't need to worry about paperwork. We'll handle the rest." The word paperwork made my mouth almost smile, but not at anything funny. "You'll handle the paperwork," I said, very flat. "Yes," he said, and then he added it, the sentence that told me where his raft was tied. "We already spoke to a notary. We've got some pages ready. If you sign them, everyone's life gets easier. No drama. We'll even make sure you're looked after." He opened his palm like he was offering me a kindness he had invented. From the pocket of his jacket, he took an envelope, thin, with a cheap stripe. He held it the way people hold tickets they expect to be hard to refuse. "We printed 2 copies," he said, "so it's simple." My daughter swallowed. I watched her throat rise and fall. "We thought it would be fair," she said, and she could not keep the question mark out of fair. I did not reach for the envelope. I did not even glance at it. "You thought," I said slowly, "that you could come to my door, change my locks, pack my clothes, turn your mother's picture to the wood, and then show me papers you don't understand and ask for my name." He bristled at "you don't understand" because men like him often hold their pride where their knowledge ought to be. "It's legal," he said. "It's real. A friend told us it's tight." He liked tight. Tight to him meant done. To me, tight meant small. "You talk about tight," I said, "like that makes a thing true." My voice was not unkind. It was a line drawn with chalk you can't find the rain to wash away. He didn't move. He was waiting for me to break the spell with a shout. I didn't. I let the quiet grow until it pressed against his chest. My daughter's eyes were shining now, not from tears, not yet, but from a kind of heat you get when you stand too close to a fire you didn't start. "Dad," she said, And the word almost cracked open everything, because the last time I heard her say it like that, she was 10 and asking me to come look at the night sky because she thought she saw a comet. "Don't make this worse," she added, and the girl with the comet went away, replaced by the woman trying to fit herself into the narrow hallway of this moment. "Worse," I repeated, "worse than you locking me out of your mother's house?" Her eyelids fluttered, just once. He stepped in then, eager to be the hero in the story in his head. "Look," he said, "we're not monsters. You can still visit. We'll even keep your chair. There's space in the garage for the old tools. We'll honor the memories. We're not heartless." He said, "Honor the way people say the name of a city they've never been to." I stared at him until he shifted his weight. "A house," I said quietly, "is not a museum to be curated by strangers." He didn't like stranger. He opened his mouth and then closed it, and the keys on his finger chimed once like a wind bell when the air moves just enough to tell you a front is coming. I moved one step closer to the threshold, not enough to cross it, but enough to let the door know I was still its man. His hand tightened around the edge. The skin at his knuckles whitened. "Careful," he warned, and there it was. The threat, or what he hoped would be mistaken for a fact. "We can call someone," he added, "if you won't respect the new setup." The new setup, like this was a TV they had mounted wrong and were proud of anyway. "Call whoever you like," I said. "Just know that when they ask whose name is on what, you'd better be ready to hear it out loud." It was the first time I let my words show their bones. He noticed. He laughed too quickly, like a man tripping who turns it into a jogging step. "We've done our research," he said. "We understand the situation, your position." I nodded as if he'd told me the weather might change. "Good," I said. "It saves time when people think they know things." He tried to show me the envelope again. I didn't lower my eyes. "Not today," I said, and his smile stumbled because he had expected my voice to rise by now, expected me to push or plead or reach. "Not today, Michael." I used his name the way you use a key, once simply, and the door that matters hears it. He blinked as if I had tapped the glass and reminded him there was a world on my side of it. My daughter shifted again, a half step back, the porch light catching the wet in her eyes that would not fall. I thought of the nights my wife and I had stood right here and counted stars. I thought of the mornings we had moved quietly so we wouldn't wake our girl before school because she loved sleep like it loved her back. "I'll take my box," I said, and I walked past them along the porch, not through the door, but along the boards that still know the shape of my steps. I opened the side door to the garage. The hinge squeaked the way it always has because I had never fixed it on purpose. My wife liked the sound, said it told her someone she loved was near. The garage smelled like oil and cedar and old rain. The box was on the workbench. My jacket sat folded on top. They hadn't noticed, or they had, and it meant nothing to them, that inside that jacket was a small tear in the lining, where my wife's fingers had once found a thread and worried it in a movie theater because the film was sad and she needed something to hold. I slid my hand into the lining and felt it, that soft path her worry had made. I put on the jacket slowly. It settled over my shoulders like a hand you don't want to remove. In the box were shirts, socks, a book I'd been reading with the receipt as a bookmark. They had packed like the impatient pack, things thrown, not placed. On top of the book, they'd dropped a bunch of old mail, as if paper could stand in for presents. I lifted the mail. An electricity bill stared up, my name printed full and clear. The corner of my mouth lifted, not a smile, but the start of one that remembered how. I set the bill back in the box and carried it to the porch. He watched me like a guard watches a man gather his things before he is walked out. "That's it?" he asked, almost disappointed by my lack of protest. "For now," I said. The words felt like steel laid under velvet. My daughter spoke again, softer, like someone learning how to talk after a long quiet. "Dad, it'll be better, less complicated. We'll visit you. We'll bring dinner. You won't have to worry about anything." She was selling me kindness as if it were medicine. "I have never worried about knowing my own door," I said. "I have worried about your happiness, about your health, about your heart, but not about my right to knock and open." She flinched at the last word, open, as if it had weight and she had to catch it. He stepped in front of her like a man stepping between a child and a dog he doesn't trust. "We're done here," he said, louder now, because loud is what men like him use when quiet is not obeyed. "Take your things. We'll be in touch about the paperwork." I lifted the box. It wasn't heavy. What was heavy was the knowledge of what they didn't know. That weight sat easy on me because I had carried it for years without complaint. On my way down the steps, I stopped and turned, my foot on the second board, the one with the long knot that looks like an eye. "Do you remember," I asked my daughter, "the day your mother and I paid for this house in full, the bread she baked?" My daughter closed her eyes, only for a second, only long enough to see a kitchen full of light and flour on her mother's cheek. "I remember," she whispered. He frowned, annoyed that the conversation had taken a path without him. "This is not about bread," he said. "It's about signatures." "Everything is about bread," I said. "Who needs it? Who waits for it to rise? Who breaks it and who is welcome at the table?" He rolled his eyes then, because men who worship paperwork think bread is just bread. "This poetry is not going to change anything," he said. "This is the new reality." I looked at him as if he were a map to a place that does not exist. "Reality," I said, "has a way of introducing itself without ceremony." He didn't understand, and that was fine. The maple leaves flicked, and somewhere in the kitchen a clock ticked, steady. I lifted the apple bag in my other hand. "I'll see you soon," I said, and I didn't say it like a wish. I said it like the time on that clock. He couldn't help himself. He had to have the last flourish. "Don't forget," he called after me as I crossed the yard. "This is ours now. You're a guest." He needed to hear it out loud, to make it more real for himself. He needed the words to do the work the locks had not finished. I didn't turn. "Guests knock," I said over my shoulder. "Owners don't have to." The box wasn't heavy, and neither was the bag. I set them in the truck bed and stood a moment with my hands on the rails the way I have stood 1,000 times after loading lumber or soil or groceries for the week. The air tasted like water that has touched stone. It tasted like patience. As I climbed into the cab, I saw the porch again through the windshield. My daughter small in the doorway, his figure large beside her, the door a mouth that could close. He said something, low. She nodded, but the nod didn't have a home to go to. I started the engine, and the sound settled into its familiar hum. I did not drive away in anger. I did not rush. I pulled out slow, the tires rolling over the same gravel I had poured there myself. One summer, with my wife handing me iced tea at the edge of the driveway and laughing because I had a streak of dust across my forehead. At the end of the lane, I looked left and right and then left again, like a man who knows how to arrive places without accidents. Then I turned the wheel toward town. There is a kind of quiet that comes when you have nothing to prove. It filled the cab like a friend who knows when not to talk. I rested my wrist on the top of the wheel and watched the trees slip past, each trunk steady, each leaf doing its small green work. On the passenger seat, the box did not rattle. The apples breathed their clean smell into the air. I thought about the word guest. I turned it over in my head the way a man turns over a coin to check its face. Guest implies an invitation. Guest implies grace. Guest implies a host with manners. They had used it like a weapon. That is not how words work in my house. At the light by the old pharmacy, I stopped and waited for green. A kid on a bike leaned one foot on the curb and one on his pedal and stared at my truck with the wide interest children saved for big machines and big dogs. I nodded to him. He nodded back like we had made a deal. I tapped the jacket pocket, an old habit just to feel the shape of what I keep close when the world gets loud. It was there, the small comfort of a plan I had not announced. I didn't need to take anything out yet. Some truths are like bread too. They rise best when left alone under a clean cloth. By the time I turned into the small lot near the post office, the sun had slanted to a kind light that makes everything look honest. I parked and sat a moment with the engine off, the clicking of cooling metal counting down to stillness. I thought of my wife again, the way she would have stood beside me in that porch doorway, not shouting, but seeing, taking stock, already deciding the next right move. Not anger, she used to say when life tried to take her breath. Something colder. She meant clarity. She meant the kind of calm that is not a surrender, but a sharpening. I closed my eyes and let the calm settle in, deep as it needed to. Then I opened them and stepped out, lifting the box with one hand and the apples with the other. I didn't need the apples, but I wanted them. I wanted to put them on my own table, in my own bowl, under my own roof, and remember what sweetness should taste like when bitterness tries to take the tongue. Behind my eyes, the image of the face-down picture would not leave. I turned it right side up in my mind and saw my wife's smile. Not the big party smile people perform for cameras, but the small daily one she used to hand me over the rim of a coffee mug, the one that said, "Keep going." I heard the porch floor creak where my daughter had stood to say no. I heard that brief wobble in her voice and stored it carefully. Even betrayal arrives with proof it can't keep steady. Even hardness tires. I would not chase them with anger. I would not argue through a door like a man shouting at the weather. I would do what I have always done in this house and in this life. I would prepare the table and lay out the truth where everyone could see it, and I would let it sit until even the loud ones had to read. When I set the box down on my own kitchen table in the small apartment off the square, the room was quiet and patient. I took the jacket off, laid it over the chair with the tear in the lining facing up, a little flag of the past waving to say, I still belong to myself. I washed an apple, cut it with the knife that fits my hand best, and ate it standing by the window. The taste was clean and bright and unforgiving in its honesty. I chewed and looked out at the street and the people crossing with bags and babies, and the small burdens we all carry like part of the body. I thought of the envelope he had tried to pass to me, its cheap paper, its false promise of simple. I thought of how he dangled those keys like a boy showing off marbles, how he spoke about notaries and loopholes and utilities like candles he believed could light a dark room he did not understand. I finished the apple, wiped the juice from my fingers with a clean towel, and folded the towel exactly twice. I have learned that order is a kind of strength. Then I sat, not to rest, but to let the day write itself inside me so I could read it back later without shaking. In the quiet, I could hear the maple from miles away, moving its leaves against the window of my home, the home that did not move when people tried to change the surface. I did not need to rush. I did not need to raise my voice. The door I would knock on next would open, not because I would pound, because it belongs to me. And because reality, the kind that wears paper and ink and years of careful choices, does not need to shout to be heard. It only needs to arrive. Morning came clean and pale at my kitchen window, and I woke with the kind of steadiness that doesn't ask permission from sleep. I brewed coffee the old way, kettle singing, grounds blooming in the filter like a small dark storm that settles into calm. The jacket with the torn lining hung over the chair. I touched that soft worry track with my thumb and felt my wife's old patience pass into me like warmth through cloth. Today, I told myself, we introduce reality. No speeches, no fists, just paper and sunlight. The post office shared a wall with the county office, and the air in those halls always smelled like dust, ink, and winter, even in summer. I nodded to the clerk at the recorder's window, a woman with a silver streak in her hair, who had once told my wife where to find the best peaches. Morning, I said. I need certified copies. Her eyebrows rose in a gentle question. Of what, Mr. Hale? The grant deed, I said, and I spoke the parcel number the way a man speaks the names of his children, numbers by heart because they carry his life. She typed with a little rhythm and hummed under her breath. The printer woke with a polite cough. Pages slid out with that soft friction sound that always feels like a promise kept. Original recorded, she said, tapping the first page, on the date we both know. Her fingertip rested on my name, where it was printed bold and calm. She pulled a heavy stamp from its cradle, lifted it like a small hammer, and pressed it down. The thunk felt good. The red seal bled into the fibers like a flower opening. And you'll want the Homestead Declaration too, she added, without my asking, because she remembered my wife and the day we filed it together, hand in hand, pretending not to be proud. Yes, I said. Please. She stamped again. Another thunk. The room seemed to inhale and hold it. You need anything else? She asked, softer now, looking at my face the way people do when they see shadow and sun at the same time. No, I said. This will do. I didn't rush. I went to the bank next, the same brick building where the manager still wore cufflinks like they mattered. He knew me by my first name, the way small towns keep names fresh. He walked me back to the little room with the small table and the 2 chairs that hold many quiet truths. The safe deposit clerk brought me the box and slid it across like a boat coming to shore. Inside was the folder I wanted, the one labeled in my wife's careful hand. House. Originals. I lifted papers and felt the weight of years arranged neatly. The paid mortgage letter, the insurance rider, The will we updated after her diagnosis. The trust document she wanted because she believed in putting strong fences around good fields. You always did things right, the manager said, not prying, just witnessing. My wife did, I answered. I just followed her lead. On the way out, I stopped at the copy shop 2 doors down and asked for 2 sets. You want tabs? The girl behind the counter asked, chewing gum like a metronome. Yes, I said. Blue for deed, yellow for trust, green for homestead, red for mortgage. She worked fast and clean, hands precise, and when she was done, she slid the binder to me across the counter with a flourish larger than such a thing requires. Looks official, she said with a grin that had not yet learned about certain kinds of sorrow. It is, I said, and I meant not just the binder. I didn't call a lawyer, I didn't need an interpreter, but I did call 2 things. First, I called a locksmith I've used for 20 years, the kind who keeps parts in coffee cans and believes that metal tells the truth if you ask it right. Not yet, I told him. Be on standby about 6 this evening. Bring a civil smile. He chuckled, knowing exactly what I meant. Then I called Officer Lane, who used to toss a football to my daughter on Halloween when he walked his beat down our block. Lane, I said, I may need a civil standby later. He didn't ask for a story. Time and address? He said, pen already scratching. 6, my place. I'll be there, he said. Standing by is something I'm good at. It wasn't about force. It was about witness. Some people respect a uniform, others respect a stamp. I had both. The rest of the day I lived small and exact. I ironed a shirt, white, the one my wife liked because the collar sits right. I shaved slow. I ate a sandwich and read 3 pages of the book they had stuffed into my box, not because I could focus, but because discipline reminds your heart it has hands and can carry itself. I laid out the papers on the table and read them aloud once, not for me, but for the echo of my wife's voice inside the words. Legal description, owner of record, vesting, trustee. Each term was a brick. The wall stood fine. I added 2 fresh pens to my folder, not because I planned to sign anything, but because there is power in bringing your own ink. On my way back through town at 5:40, the evening laid a clean light over the roofs. The maple by the house would be spilling its shadow across the porch by now. I parked by the curb instead of the driveway because ritual has a way of keeping people honest. The porch light was already on, a little too early, a little too eager to declare control of the dusk. There were shoes by the mat, his work boots thrown careless, my daughter's flats lined careful beside them, as if tidiness could bless the mess above it. I climbed the steps with the folder in my left hand and nothing in my right. I knocked once, just once. A knock that said, "This is not a request. This is the door listening to its owner." He opened, not with hesitation, but with performance. "Back already?" he said, and his eyes flicked to the folder and back to my face like a man checking the weather before holding his picnic anyway. "Did you bring your pen?" he added, enjoying himself. "I brought something else," I said. My daughter stepped into view beside him, her face softer in this light, as if evening forgives sharp lines. "Dad," she said, a breath caught behind the word. He cut across her. "Let's not waste time. Papers are inside on the table. We'll explain." He gestured too big, like a man showing a horse how tall he is. I did not cross the threshold until I saw it. The frame on the narrow table turned upright again. Somehow, in the hours between, someone had lifted my wife's face out of the dark and set her eyes back toward the room. My daughter's doing, surely. A small tremor went through my chest and then settled. "Good evening," I said, to the frame as much as to them, and then I stepped in as though the house had exhaled to make room for me. The hall smelled faintly of that cedar polish and something else, lemon cleaner, too strong, like someone trying to erase fingerprints. On the dining table were their pages, the sort printed at office supply stores, quitclaim blanks, something with a signature line dressed up in big words and thin cents. 2 pens lay like bait across the top. I set my binder down gently and opened it slow, not for drama, but for truth's sake. "I'll start," I said. The words came out quiet and kind, the way you tell a child the real name of a thing that has frightened them. I pulled the first tab, blue. The certified copy of the grant deed sat up straight under the plastic sleeves like a soldier being counted. "Read the top," I said, and I didn't look at him. I looked at her. She leaned because the body knows where it finds water. Her finger hovered over the date, over the recorder's stamp, then landed on my name where the type is thicker. I watched as it found the line. Owner of record. She whispered it. Owner of record. Whisper like a prayer or an apology. He reached for the page, smirk turning into something else, something trying to grow and not given sunlight. Anyone can print something off the internet, he scoffed. That's when I slid the page up a little so the seal could catch the light. The embossed stamp raised its small mountain ranges under his fingers when he finally did touch it. And I saw the moment his brain realized that paper can feel like landscape. Certified, I said. From the recorder's office, this morning. I tapped the red stamp gently. You can call, I added, or we can, together. Lane's form moved in the doorway behind me, then quiet, a respectful ghost of a presence. He nodded once to me, once to them, and took up a gentle lean on the outer rail, where he could see and not interrupt. I didn't give the silence time to clot. I pulled the yellow tab next. Trust, I said. When your mother fell sick, we put the house in a living trust. Trustee, me, successor. Trustee, not you. I let that sit like a stone in a shallow bowl. Any transfer, any encumbrance, any promise attached to these walls requires my written consent as trustee. My daughter swallowed and nodded, just once, small. Her husband tried a laugh that didn't make it out of his throat. Trust can be challenged, he said. A friend told me. Friends say many things, I answered. This one says what it says. I slid the page so he could see the signatures, notarized, dated, the notary seal like a tiny sun whose light does not fade because boys don't like it. He tried a different road. Utilities, he said quickly, almost triumphant. We transferred the accounts. We're paying now. I slid the green tab. Homestead declaration, I said. Recorded. Another seal, another date. This home is protected in ways you don't understand. He blinked as if a moth had struck his eye. Big words, he muttered. Old words, I corrected, and almost smiled, the kind that outlive tempers and schemes. He reached finally for his own envelope, desperate to get back to the script. Here, he said. Quit claim, you sign, we file, it's all clean. He held the pen like a dagger and a wand at once. I didn't touch it. I turned a red tab instead and lifted the letter from the mortgage company, the one that smelled faintly of the day my wife baked bread. Paid in full, I read, because sometimes reading out loud is the only way to make truth climb walls and sit where it belongs. Zero balance. I let the corner of the letter touch the table again and heard that whisper slap sound paper makes when it lands square. We paid, I said. We paid together. We burned the last stub in the fireplace and laughed and danced in the kitchen until the neighbor tapped on the wall and told us to calm down. Remember, sweet girl? My daughter's hand went to her mouth, not to stifle anything, but to hold something in place that wanted to fall. He looked between us and grew smaller by inches. His shoulders lost a little air. The keys in his pocket were suddenly not instruments, but metal. You can't just, he began, and then he stopped. Because words will not carry weight, they are not built to bear. He put his palm flat on the table and tried another angle. We talked to someone, he repeated from yesterday, thinner now. We were told there are ways, that if someone has been acting like an owner, acting, I said gently, is for stages. I slid a sheet from the back pocket. Property tax bill, current, paid. My name. The county crest. The number that does not lie. Owners pay, I said. Owners sign, owners shoulder, guests visit, guests ask. I didn't look at him when I said guests. I looked at my daughter so she could see how a word is supposed to wear its own clothes. Her eyes filled then, not with big tears, not with drama. Just with that clean shine that says something is breaking and something is building in the same breath. She reached toward the yellow tab, as if maybe the paper would burn her if she touched it wrong. Trust, she said, tasting the word again, but this time not like a law, like a promise. Mom wanted this? Your mother wanted you safe, I said. From hunger, from bad days, from men who mistake confidence for knowledge. She put things where they wouldn't blow away when the wind kicked up. I didn't say the rest, the part where my wife had smiled and squeezed my hand and said, Our girl is good, but the world is full of people who like easy doors. A car rolled by outside, and Lane shifted his weight, boots soft on wood. The house seemed to lean closer to listen. Even the maple hushed. He tried again, one last attempt from whatever list his friend had given him. "We've changed the locks," he said, but there was no strength in it now, just habit. "We have possession." The word possession crumbled when he put it in his mouth. I turned the binder closed and set my palm flat on the cover, the way you settle a child before sleep. "Locks turn," I said. "Paper stands." And then, very calm, very plain, I added, "And we won't be needing the notary you picked." He stared at my hand on the binder, as if it were the thing making his heart beat too fast. He looked at Lane, finally seeing him. Lane tipped his chin a degree, nothing more. The kind of nod that says, "I see you, and I see the thing you didn't want seen." My daughter reached for the picture frame and straightened it a hair, a tiny gesture that lit the room like sunrise. Her face, reflected in the glass over her mother's smile, looked younger for a breath and then older in a better way. "We were wrong," she said, so quiet I might have missed it if the house didn't help carry her voice to me. He turned to her, shock flashing across his eyes like a fish underwater. "What are you doing?" he hissed, forgetting me for the first time since I knocked. "Do you want to throw away everything we planned?" She didn't answer him. She looked at me. "Dad," she said, and she did not add a request or an excuse, just my name in her mouth the way it was supposed to be. I gave her one nod, slow. Not forgiveness, not yet. Permission to stand where the floor doesn't tilt. He made a sound then, something between a laugh and a cough, and dragged a hand through his hair. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice betrayed him. It searched for a place to land and found none. He picked up the quitclaim and waved it, but the paper had become light and foolish in his fingers. "You can't—" He tried again and stopped again, and the keys in his pocket gave a tiny jangle like a nervous tick. I opened the binder one more time and slid a single sheet free that I'd tucked between the pages. A letter, not from a court, not from a lawyer, but from me. Dated last winter, addressed to my daughter. The paper smelled faintly of the drawer where I keep stamps. "I wrote this," I said, "the night after your mother's anniversary, when I couldn't sleep. I didn't send it. I kept it. I didn't hand it over. I read the last paragraph only. About the house, about the maple, about how the front step knows the weight of our joy and our sorrow, about how the door would always open for her, always. But that doors are not gifts to be taken. They are trusts to be honored. When I finished, I folded the page and slid it back. I didn't need them to hold it. I needed them to hear it in the air that belonged to us." He slumped into a chair as if someone had pulled a pin from him. The chair made a small, complaining sound. He looked at the table, at the binder, at the pens he had laid out like traps that had been stepped around without effort. His mouth worked, but the script was gone. My daughter reached into her pocket and took out the ring with the new keys. Her hand shook. No, not shook, vibrated like a wire carrying current. She put the ring on the table slowly, not offering, not begging, just putting metal where it could not pretend to be anything else. Her husband stared. "Don't," he said low. "Don't you dare." She didn't look at him when she spoke the next words. She spoke to me. "I'm sorry," she said, simple, bare, the only dress truth needs. Evening leaned in through the window and painted the edges of things gold. Dust drifted like tiny planets. Lane cleared his throat once, soft, just to remind the room that the world exists outside papers and hearts. I closed the binder and slid it into my arm. Then I placed my other hand on the keys, not to take them, not yet, but to feel their temperature, cool, honest. Metal does not lie. "We're going to do this properly," I said, not loud, not slow, but final. He looked up at me with a man's face that had been a boy's face an hour ago. "Properly?" he echoed, like the word belonged to a language he had not learned. "Yes," I said, "with witnesses, with receipts, with respect for the dead and the living." My finger tapped once on the blue tab of the binder, and the sound was so small you could miss it. Inside that sound, a whole house stood still and listened. He stared at me like I'd reached across the table and turned down the volume on his whole life. The house held its breath. Lane stayed where he was on the rail, a steady shadow in the corner of my eye. I slid the binder under my arm and set my palm, light, on the ring of keys my daughter had placed on the table. "We start by restoring order," I said, "not by shouting, not by winning, by putting things where they belong." I looked at my daughter first. "Step out with me a second." She came because habit outruns pride for a few precious beats when you need it to. We stood on the porch where the air was cooler, Maple shade laid over us like a calm hand. I need you to hear two things, I said. One, you are my daughter, and that doesn't vanish because someone prints forms or says new rules. Two, there are consequences for choices, not punishments, consequences. They arrive like the mail. She nodded, quick, eyes bright and unsteady. I was wrong, she whispered. I knew it when he said guest. I heard it, and something in me broke. I turned Mom's picture back up. I wanted to do that much before you came. I breathed once, slow. I saw, I said, it mattered. She looked back into the hall where he waited, body electric with the feeling of losing ground. What happens now? She asked. Now, I said. We take the weight off words and put it on facts. Dawson's truck rolled to the curb, the way only a man who has known a street for 20 years can roll a truck. Quiet, sure, with no need to rev the engine to prove it's alive. He climbed out with his canvas bag and the kind of smile that says he has heard every story a lock can tell and none of them scare him. Evening, he said to no one in particular. Lane gave him a nod from the rail, the town's old choreography falling into place without rehearsal. Dawson's eyes touched the table through the open door, the papers, the tense man inside, the keys under my hand, and he didn't ask a thing. Shall I? He said. You shall, I answered. We went back in. Michael squared himself in the doorway, like he could make himself bigger by remembering how. You can't just waltz in and change things, he said, voice fighting for authority and losing air. I didn't look at him when I spoke. I spoke to the house. I am restoring my locks to match my deed, I said, simple as reading the date. Dawson set his bag down and laid his tools in a neat line like cutlery before a meal. Sir, Michael barked at Lane, are you going to let this happen? Lane's voice came easy, almost friendly. I'm here to keep the peace, he said, and to witness that the person of record is doing maintenance on his property. He tilted his head toward my binder without touching it. Even his eyes knew not to smudge a seal. Michael's mouth opened and closed. He was reaching for words the way a man reaches into a drawer for a screwdriver and finds only spoons. Possession, he blurted, but even he could hear how thin it sounded now. Dawson worked with a quiet pleasure, screws lined up like obedient soldiers, cylinder out with a soft click, new core in with a firmness that felt like a handshake from an old friend. Nice door, he murmured. Good wood. Shame to put a cheap lock on it. This one will serve. He glanced up at me for the smallest confirmation. I gave it with a blink. He smiled and went on, hands steady. Metal speaking to metal in a language that belongs to patience. While Dawson worked, I took a sheet from my folder and slid it across the table toward Michael. This is a revocation of permission to occupy, I said. You'll find dates, signatures, and the basic courtesies I still intend to show my daughter. He stared as if the page might bite. This is my house now, he muttered, but he didn't reach for the pen. No, I said. This is my house still. You have been guests who forgot to knock. The word lay there between us, heavy and plain. He lifted his chin, a last flare. You can't make me leave tonight, he said. I didn't raise my voice. I won't drag you out, I said. We don't do that in this home. You'll leave this evening by your own feet, with your things, and you'll hand back anything that belongs to this house. You have one bag on the porch rail and another in the hall closet. We'll start with those. My daughter was already moving. Without fanfare, she went to the closet, knelt, and pulled a duffel free. She set it beside the table. The house made a small sound then, not a creak, not a thump. Something like relief passing through boards that had been holding a breath longer than was good for them. Michael didn't help. He stared at Lane, at Dawson, at me, searching for an ally he hadn't earned. Lane lifted a palm, not in warning, just to show there were no weapons here, but time and truth. Do the tidy thing, Lane said softly. It'll sit better in your stomach tomorrow. Where do you get off? Michael began, but his voice snapped, because Dawson gave the new deadbolt a last firm turn, and the sound it made was final, without being loud. It was the sound of rightness, metal aligned with purpose. Dawson stepped back and wiped his hands on a clean rag. Front's done, he said. Back in garage? I nodded. Please. He moved down the hall with a craftsman's casual blessing, touching the door frames like he was saying hello to old friends. Michael made a desperate pivot. "Utilities," he tried again, clutching at the last rope. "They're in our names now. You think that doesn't mean anything?" I slid a set of envelopes from my folder. Receipts, current bills, stamped paid. "Names can sit anywhere," I said. "Responsibility sits with the owner. You have been paying a month. I've been paying years." He sagged then, just enough to show the boy and the man. I didn't soften. Mercy is not the same as forgetfulness. "Gather what is yours," I said. "Leave what is not." He looked around like a man in a museum told not to touch. The house helped him in its way. His jacket on the chair looked out of place. His shoes by the door looked loud. The coffee mug with a brand logo he'd brought glared at the porcelain. My wife chose one winter when the world needed blue. He took the mug. Good. He started with the easy things. My daughter climbed the stairs, slow, and came down with a small box. She had packed it like a person who knows the geography of a room, the ring stand from the dresser, the phone charger that always slipped behind the nightstand, the paperback he kept pretending to read. She held it at her hip and looked at me, waiting. "Set it by the door," I said. "We'll check the rooms together before anyone leaves." The word together did something to her shoulders. They lowered by a degree. She wiped the corner of one eye with the side of her hand, the way she did as a girl when she didn't want anyone to notice she'd cried. Dawson came back from the garage with another small nod. "All matched," he said. "Same key, cleaner throw, satisfying." He slid 2 sealed key envelopes from his bag and placed them on the table as if they were bread wrapped in paper. He didn't push them toward anyone. He let them rest there, neutral, patient. Michael stared at them like he could will them to float to his pocket. I reached out and took one, then slid the other to the edge near my daughter. "For you," I said. "For when you come, you'll knock first. You'll wait to be welcomed. That's how we heal a door." Her breath hitched. "Yes, Dad," she said, quiet and pure. "Wait a minute," Michael said, pointing at the envelope near her. "She lives here. That's her key." I met his finger with my eyes, and he withdrew it like he'd touched a hot pan. "She is my daughter," I said. "She will never be locked out of her father's house, but she will respect it. Tonight she leaves with you, not as punishment, as pause. Tomorrow she can come back, for dinner, for talk, for whatever honest thing we decide after the air clears. Tonight, the house rests." My daughter's face folded in on itself and steadied. "All right," she said. "I'll pack a bag." Michael sputtered. "We can't just—" "You can," I said. "You will. The maple needs quiet. So do I." I walked down the hall to the small cupboard under the stairs, the one most people think holds paint cans and old brooms. It does. It also holds a safe sunk into the concrete like a quiet anchor. My wife used to joke that the house had a heartbeat down here. I knelt, spun the dial through numbers my hands remember without help, and opened it. The cool air inside smelled faintly of paper and cedar and thyme. I lifted a flat tin, the kind cookies once came in, and set it on the floor. Inside were letters, hers to me, mine to her, rubber-banded and careful. There was a narrow velvet pouch with the thin gold bracelet she wore the summer our daughter lost her first tooth. And there was an envelope my wife addressed in that careful hand to our daughter, the ink a touch faded, the paper still thick. I had never read it. It wasn't mine to read. I held it a second, feeling its quiet heat, then slid it under my arm with the binder. When I came back to the table, Michael had gathered a defensive pile. Chargers, that mug, a sweater, loose coins, a pocket knife. He liked to show men he wanted to. Impress. He looked at my arm as if I were carrying a verdict. "What's that?" he asked. "Something that was always waiting," I said. I handed the envelope to my daughter. "From your mother," I said. Her mouth opened and closed. The air left the room and came back. She held it like a bird, careful not to crush. "Can I—" "When you're ready," I said. Not because someone wants to win a moment. There was one more thing I needed to do, because correctness needs more than paper. It needs memory put straight. I went to the narrow table and lifted my wife's picture from its frame. Behind it were 3 photographs tucked like you tuck a note in a lunch pail. Our daughter at 5, missing 2 teeth and beaming. The day we put the maple in the ground. The mortgage letter bent at the corner from being shown too often. I placed the mortgage letter on the table beside the paid-in-full notice I'd brought, and for a second, the two of them looked like brothers who hadn't seen each other in a while. We paid, I said again, not to boast, but to put the sound of truth into the dust and the rug and the paint. We paid in days, in nights, in favors, in overtime, in soup, in patience. We did not pay to be told we are guests. Michael couldn't hold still. Men who mistake speed for strength rarely can. He picked up his duffel, dropped it, picked it up again. "This is humiliation," he said. I met his eyes. "No," I said. "This is learning. Humiliation is what you tried at the door yesterday. Learning is what happens when reality arrives and you stay in the room long enough to shake its hand." Lane shifted his weight, and the board under his boot made a soft groan that said it agreed. Dawson zipped his bag, as if sewing a seam on a cut that would heal. I walked him through the rooms, not to gloat, but to finish. We pointed to things that were house and things that were him. The spare toothbrush he could take. The painting of the lake my wife made on a rainy weekend. House. The throw blanket my daughter bought last fall. Hers. To decide later. He tried to argue about the TV. I touched the receipt slip tucked under it, dated 3 years ago, my signature clear. He said something about a rug. I traced the worn path in it with my toe, where our daughter's tricycle had sat for a summer. "House," I said. He stopped arguing. We came back downstairs with the last of his small things. My daughter set her overnight bag by the door and tucked her mother's letter into the safest corner of it like light into a pocket. Dawson handed me the final tag and a small envelope with 2 extra blanks. "If you need a third later," he said, "call me. I'll cut it while the metal still remembers." I paid him by check, the way we've always done it. His name written slow, like a thank you said, with a hand. He tipped the bill of his cap, not a performance, just a punctuation mark. "Nice to see good wood in good hands," he said, and he was gone before anyone could dress the moment in more than it needed. The sky had settled into that blue that keeps its promises. The porch light no longer looked bossy. It looked what it was, a bulb doing its work. I stood with the door open and felt the house breathe again. Michael shifted his duffel higher. He wanted to slam something, a door, a sentence. "If you think this is over," he said, "you don't know me." "I know enough," I answered, "and I know my door." He stepped onto the porch. For a second he turned, and I saw a flicker, a boy who didn't get what he wanted at a store and was trying to decide whether to cry or steal. Then the flicker turned back into a mask. He looked at my daughter. "You coming?" he said. She lifted her bag. "I'll be in the car," she told him, and then she turned to me and added, "Tomorrow?" The question hung like a bridge between 2 cliffs. "Tomorrow," I said, and the words sounded like a plank laid down and held fast. Lane pushed off the rail, the witness stepping back into the street where men carry lunches and write tickets and nod to dogs. "You good?" he asked me, the way you ask a friend if the fence you just fixed will keep the goats where they belong. "I am," I said. "Thank you for standing still." He smiled. "Standing still is trickier than people think." He tipped his head to my daughter. "Evening, ma'am?" She nodded, eyes full, letter safe. He jogged down the steps, quiet as a man who has walked this block for years, and slid into his cruiser, lights off, engine low. Michael went down the walk first. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't know how to leave a place he hadn't learned how to enter. My daughter followed after a second. At the end of the walk, she stopped and turned around, and lifted the key envelope a tiny inch like a toast, and then tucked it away again. I watched their car pull from the curb and stutter at the sign, where I have always stopped and looked left and right and left again. He looked once and punched the gas because he thinks the world will slow down for his urgency. It doesn't. It never has. Inside, the house was not empty. It was itself. The rug knew my step again. The picture on the narrow table looked at the hall the way it used to. I closed the door and turned the lock Dawson had set and listened to the clean throw of it catch and hold. I pressed my palm flat to the wood, not in claim, not in victory, but in greeting. "Evening," I said to a room that has heard my voice from anger to laughter and back again. The maple's leaves moved against the window, like a soft broom sweeping dust off old grief. On the table, the pens he had brought lay unused, shining their cheap blue shine. I slid them into a drawer with the rubber bands and the spare tape and the string that has tied more packages than I can count. I opened the window above the sink and let the lake's breath find. The curtains. I wash my hands like a man who has come in from the shop and knows to get the grit off before he touches his wife's clean things. I took an apple from the bag still sitting by the door and set it in the blue bowl my wife used for lemons because sweetness looks good in the right color. I laid 2 more beside it without thinking, and they made a shape that pleased the eye, a small altar to ordinary good. There was work to do, lists to write, a meeting to set for tomorrow, calls to make so that utilities find their right names again, but lists can wait until a house has heard a minute of silence that belongs only to it. I sat in my old chair. It knew me. My back found the old valley in the cushion and fit. I closed my eyes and saw my daughter's face when she touched the yellow tab and read the word trust, like it had 2 meanings and both had finally become true. I saw my wife's hand in the way the envelope's corners squared themselves in our daughter's grip. I breathed and let the room find its temperature around me. The door, the right door, did what doors do when they are honored. It kept what should be kept, and it promised to open when it should open. In the half-dark, with the street lamp writing a pale coin on the floorboards, I could hear the clock in the kitchen counting the kind of seconds that make up real life. No trumpet, no victory song, just the sound of something set right, and the knowledge that tomorrow held more setting right to do, not with rage, but with careful hands and a voice that stays flat when men try to bend it. Morning slid into the house like a quiet promise, and I let it. I woke before the first car passed on our street and brewed coffee the way my wife taught me, water from the kettle just before the boil, a slow pour so the grounds bloom and settle, patience in a cup. The maple tossed a soft shadow against the kitchen wall, and I could feel the rooms listening the way they do when something important is about to be said. I laid out a plate, 2 cups, and a small saucer for the apples I would cut later. The blue bowl with its simple white rim sat in the center like an anchor. Today was not about victory. It was about returning the weight of things to where it belonged and letting the people involved feel that weight in their own palms. I didn't rush to errands. I did small, exact tasks. I wiped the table until it shone. I set the binder on the chair beside mine, reachable, not flaunted. I put my wife's picture where the morning light would find it first, and when it touched her face in the glass, I felt my breath match the house's breath. At 10, I wrote 3 notes, brief, clear, the kind a tired world can read without confusion. 1 to the utility companies with the attached proof to restore accounts. 1 to the county to update the contact address on file. 1 sealed to my daughter, not for today, but for a day when words might be needed more than keys. Truth is a tool. Tools work when you keep them clean. Around noon, there was a knock, not loud, not timid. A knock with a rhythm that told me the person on the other side had been counting heartbeats. I opened the door, and there she was, my daughter, hair pulled back the way her mother used to pull it for church so it wouldn't fall into the candles. She held the key envelope in one hand and a paper in the other, the letter from her mother that I had given her the night before. Her eyes were swollen in the way that means the crying wasn't rage, it was remembering. I read it, she said, and her voice was small and sure. She wrote about the day we planted the tree. She wrote that home is a covenant, not a prize. She wrote that I am loved and that the house is not a gift to hold over anyone, but a table to keep set. She swallowed, and for a moment she was 9 again, sitting at that table making place cards out of scrap paper because she wanted every doll to have a name and a seat. I was wrong, she said. I wanted approval to feel like power, and I traded respect for speed. I'm sorry. We stood there, and I let the apology sit unadorned because apologies deserve space. I stepped back. Come in, I said, the way a door says it when it knows the feet that will cross. She came to the table and set her mother's letter beside the blue bowl, touching the corner like it was a sleeping thing she didn't want to wake. She didn't sit. She looked around slowly, eyes catching on the frame on the narrow table, the rug, the little chip on the corner where the console meets the wall. It feels like her, she whispered, even the silence. I poured coffee, not too much, and slid the cup toward her the way my wife used to do. Handle turned just so, steam rising like something you can hold. She wrapped her hands around it and did not drink. Her breath fogged the surface and then cleared it. I asked him to come, she said after a while. I told him we needed to set things right, properly, with respect. He said he would. I don't know if he meant it. As if the sentence had invited him, a car door thudded at the curb, a quick stomping walk, not a knock, a try at the handle. The new bolt gave a clear, gentle refusal. Then a knock, too hard, hurried, like someone trying to prove to the wood that their impatience is a key. I didn't sigh. I opened, and there he was, Michael, jaw clenched, hair combed, a folder of his own under his arm as if matching mine could give him weight. "We're not doing this all over again," he said, already raising his voice to the level where he feels most at home. "I talked to my friend," he said. "Come inside," I said, flat and calm. "You will sit. You will listen. You will speak when it's your turn. Or you will stand on the porch and shout to the birds." His face flickered. The birds sounded like they might laugh. He stepped in because the house had decided to accept him, under these terms and not others. He saw the binder, the letter, the blue bowl. He saw my daughter at the table with her hands on her cup. He paused, briefly wrong-footed by the normalcy of it all. Drama wants a stage. Truth prefers a kitchen. "I don't consent to any legal admissions," he said, and he almost sounded like a man in a movie who thinks using the right phrases changes the weather. "Good," I said, sitting. "No one asked for theater. We asked for truth." He remained standing, then thought better of the posture and sat across from me, not next to my daughter. He set his folder down and spread it like he was dealing cards. "I brought an agreement," he announced. "A family settlement. You sign, we agree to visit rules, we manage the house, you get a stipend." He smiled, a salesman selling rain to a river. "It's fair," he added. My daughter flinched. She turned to him with a look I hadn't seen on her face yet, a look that had learned something in the night and intended to keep it. "You didn't read Mom's letter," she said. He waved it off. "I don't need a ghost's opinion," he said. And there it was, the sentence that knocked the last dust off the truth. The house seemed to shift away from him an inch. Even the maple paused its leaves in the window. I didn't raise my voice. "You are in my home," I said, speaking about my wife. "Careful?" He shifted his eyes, an instinct for danger finally waking up inside him. "I didn't mean—" "You did," I said. "That's the problem. You meant it." He took a breath, tried to restart. "Look," he said, lowering his tone to what he might imagine is reasonable. "I talked to someone who knows these things. There are ways to—" "To what?" my daughter cut in, her voice steady as a table leg. "To take what isn't yours? To call yourself a savior because you can change a lock?" He stared at her, surprised to find a spine where he had been counting on a ribbon. "I'm trying to provide," he said, a little desperate, "for us." She didn't soften. Provision without respect is theft with a pretty shirt. I slid my binder closer, not as a threat, but as a reminder. "Last night," I said, "I held back one thing because anger shouldn't carry gifts, and gifts shouldn't carry anger. I took out a simple manila envelope, no stamp, no seal. Inside, a single sheet. A bank's letter confirming funds set aside in a payable-on-death account. I placed it where both of them could see. 2 months ago," I said, "I opened an account to help you and my daughter with a down payment for your own home when the time was right. It was my wife's idea before she died, written in her notes, a little arrow pointing to the word future. I had planned to tell you on your anniversary. It would have been a surprise, and then a plan. It is not the house. It is not this table. It is a start. Yesterday, when you changed my locks, I went to the bank first thing and put your name off it." The sentence landed like a stone dropped in shallow water. You could see the shape of it hit and the ripples roll out. He blanched and then flushed, ashamed and angry, in a skin that didn't know which way to sit. "You're punishing me?" he said. "I'm holding you to your words," I answered. "You said I am a guest here. Guests don't get the deed. Guests don't get the keys. Guests don't decide the table. Men who talk about family while cutting it to fit their hunger don't get handed the knife." He reached for a defense and found none that could hold air. "That money was for us," he muttered. "It was for family," I corrected. "And family doesn't put each other on the porch and call it love." My daughter's hands had moved from the cup to the envelope. She didn't open it. She held it like a passport that proves where you belong. "What happens to it now?" she asked, eyes on me, not him. "It waits," I said. "For you and only you. For when you can build with a partner who calls a home what it is, not a ladder." I didn't add that perhaps he could be that partner if he learned. People can learn. But you don't teach with bribes, you teach with boundaries. "And if we stay together," she said carefully, "and he learns, I nodded once. Then we talk again, with conditions written not just in ink but in behavior, respect, terms, time, an agreement that protects you from ambition dressed up as care. He sagged, and the chair under him made that small whining sound again. "This is humiliation," he said for the second time in 2 days. "No," I said for the second time. "This is a mirror. If it hurts, it's because you've been walking around with mud on your face and calling it a crown." He stared at me, then at my daughter, then at the letter she held, then at the picture on the narrow table, as if he expected my wife to step out of it and take his side. She didn't. She wouldn't have. Silence spread out, clean and wide, the kind of silence that gives you 2 roads and lets you pick one without shouting. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his palm and dropped the lawyer words. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its shine. "I thought," he started, and then stopped because the sentence he'd planned would no longer carry him where he wanted to go. He tried again, a smaller truth. "I was scared," he said. "About money, about not being able to give her the life she deserves. I thought if I took charge of the roof, I'd feel like I belonged under it." He looked at me finally without defiance. "I didn't think about you. I didn't think about her mother. I grabbed what I could reach and called it leadership. I let that sit too. Confession is not absolution. It is the floor you can start from. Belonging is earned in small ways," I said, taking out the trash before someone asks, turning the picture up when fear tells you to look away, calling the man whose name is on the deed Dad, and meaning it. My daughter's shoulders softened, and the line of her mouth let go of its fight. She turned to him. "I won't be spoken for," she said. "Not by letters I didn't read, not by friends you didn't introduce to my father, not by keys you jangled at the door like a bell for a dog. If we are to be we, it will be with respect. You can come to dinner tonight and start again. Or you can go and think and call when you have learned to knock." He stared like a man standing at the mouth of a tunnel he didn't know he had been digging toward. Then he nodded, a small, clumsy nod. "Dinner," he said, and the words sounded foreign in his mouth, as if he'd forgotten what dinner is when no one is playing king. "We cook the way you cook when you're learning how to talk again without breaking the plates." I peeled potatoes at the sink. My daughter washed the lettuce and picked the leaves that looked like the kind her mother loved, crisp, a little sweet, a little bitter. He set the table, careful this time, asking where things went. And when he put the forks on the right, I said nothing. I watched him realize and fix it without drama. The house warmed, garlic in the pan, the faint whistle of the kettle. The maple shadow moved across the floor like time you can see. At the table, we didn't toast. We didn't make speeches. We ate like people who have been hungry for something other than food. He tried twice to puff up and then thought better of it. My daughter opened her mother's letter and read one paragraph out loud, her voice catching on a line that said, "If the day comes when love looks like control, wait. Control is fear in iron clothes. Love waits while fear rattles and then asks for the key." She folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope as if tucking a child in. When we finished, he stood and took the plates without being told. He washed, dried, and put them back where they belonged after asking each time, "Here?" That was the point, asking. He put his hand in his pocket once, fished for keys he no longer owned, and then took it out again, empty. He looked at the door and then at me. "Tomorrow," he said, quiet as a man who knows the difference between entering and bursting in. "If I come by, I'll call first." "Good," I said. "If you come, you'll knock, and we will open if we're ready, because that is what home is." He left without a speech. The door closed and the new lock settled, with a sound that has begun to feel like a heartbeat. My daughter stayed. We ate apples from the blue bowl while the kitchen cooled. She told me small things, work, a book she'd half finished, the plant that wouldn't stay alive in their apartment because the window was mean to it. I told her about the woman at the recorder's office and her humming, about Dawson's comment on good, would, about Lane's quiet nod. We laughed once, a sound that felt like a hinge being oiled. When she finally rose to go, she took the key envelope and slipped it into her pocket, then took it out again and set it on the narrow table by her mother's picture. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll knock." She kissed her fingers and pressed them to the glass, a small salute, and left with her step light and honest. I stood at the window and watched her walk to the curb, shoulders squared. The street had that soft evening hush again, the kind that lets you hear your own name, the way the people who love you say it. I turned back into the house and felt the room settle. The binder went back into its place, the letter into hers. The blue bowl sat where it should. There would be more conversations, more paperwork, more learning. Reality takes time to teach, and that is fine. I am patient. I am not angry. I am something colder and kinder, clear. I touched the door one more time, palm flat, and thought of the night we paid the mortgage and danced while the neighbor knocked on the wall. I thought of my wife's laugh, a river sound. I thought of my daughter at 5, blue chalk on her fingertips. I thought of last night's lock and this morning's knock and the small, strong line between them called respect. Families don't take what's yours and tell you you're not welcome. Families keep tables set, pictures upright, and doors honest. And when someone forgets, families don't shout. They show the deed, they turn the lock with quiet hands, they pass the bread, and they wait until the fear and iron close rattles itself tired and sets down the keys it never owned. That's what we did. That's what we'll keep doing. If this story moved you or made you think of your own front door, your own table, your own people, like it, share it with someone who needs the reminder. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what home means to you. And subscribe so you don't miss the next story.